It is the 251st vlog back in the familiar confines of the north parking lot of the Peppermill in Reno. I am on tilt, as you can imagine. The good news is the universe has informed me I am now allowed to potentially run good at poker today because both my hockey team and my football team have not won championships in the same year. There's only so much run good one is allowed, so hopefully I'm allowed some here today.
Don't wanna sleep in, cause I got something to prove. I gotta take what I hate and finally make a move.
Sure, if you're watching this vlog, then you're aware of the fact that one of the most reliable things to look for in poker is that the more organized a player's chip stack is, the tighter he plays. Needless to say, that dynamic is going to come into play on this vlog. A 0-5-10 game would get fired up at 11 a.m. on table 1. I had just booked nearly a $1,200 loss the previous day, so I was looking to bounce back on this Thursday at Peppermill. The game featured mostly regulars, but there were two unknowns. One was a grinder, who would later tell me that he visited this poker room from Northern Europe as a result of my vlog. The other was an absolute wild card. And boy, would he be something to see. Normally, I do not even name players on this vlog because what's really the point? And I'm not going to show this guy for reasons you can imagine, but I've got to name this guy because he was such a force, and I'm going to be talking about him so much that we have to just say more than what position he was in on the table. So we get a four-way limped pot with me being in possession of the premium holding that is ace-deuce offsuit in the blind. With 40 in, the board would come out jack 5-4 with two hearts. I certainly am not a fan of having someone bet this and just check calling with a gutter and a backdoor nut flush draw, so I decided to just bet it myself, making it $35. And sure enough, this unknown on the button, whose name is Tom, is my only caller. So with 110 in, the turn is a beautiful offsuit 3. Apparently I have wasted no time making hands on this day. I bet right out for $85 with it, and he doesn't waste much time before making the call. And with 280 in the pot, the river pairs the jack. He's got about 1,000 behind at this point, so he's got me covered, and it really felt like this was a beautiful spot to just bet big. Because, generally speaking, when a player takes this kind of line against you, he's going to have a jack a lot of the time here, and is not going to fold it, obviously, when making 3 of them. So I decide to overbet the pot, making it 300. He immediately starts stacking chips together, so it was clear that folding was not going to be the option he was going to choose. It then was made clear that he wasn't calling either, but instead, he min raises to 600. Now, there are players in this game at Peppermill that I would fold this hand to. And if I were looking for an argument as to why this player might actually have me beat here, not that I am, but if I was, I would say that he was in the rock, and obviously he could have literally any 2 cards in this spot, so a lot of his weird Jack 3 type hands have now filled up. But I certainly felt if he had that, he'd be doing a lot more than min raising. So obviously, I'm not folding. I put in the 300 more, creating a $1,480 pot. He shows a 3 first, and I said to myself, oh, don't tell me he's got pocket 3s here, but he didn't. His other card was a 7. So that I did not expect. I thought for sure he had something in this spot that he was raising for value, but that wasn't the case as we take down a nice one right out of the gate. So I win that one and wouldn't waste much more time getting into some more pots against the same opponent. The first would come with Queen Jack of Spades when I'd flop a gut shot and backdoor flush draw, and he would donk lead for 75, and I'd fold after breaking the turn. In this next hand, there was more to it, and a very similar situation though. I have Ace King of Spades under the gun and make it 35. Tom calls in the cutoff, and the big blind, who is in the rock, completes. So with 105 in the pot, the flop would come out queen 9-10 rainbow with 1 spade. Not knowing what the hell to expect out of this guy, as you just saw in that hand with the 7-3, I check it over to him. He bets 75, and the big blind goes out. Closing the action, I'm not folding ace-king suited here, and I stick around. And with 255 in, the turn is the deuce of spades, giving me the nut flush draw. I check again, pretty much planning on check calling whatever he bets, and sure enough, he fires pretty big, making it 200. At this point, he has about 800 behind. Spoiler alert, he'd be adding on more later. But in this instance, I actually have him covered and make the call. So with 655 in, the river is a disgusting queen. So I brick out all of my outs and check. He bets all in for $800, and I have nothing to do but fold. Luckily for me, I didn't hit an ace or a king on the river, because against him, I could have considered making the call. But it ended up being a spot where all of my outs were obviously live, and I would have certainly gotten paid on them, because he would proceed to show Jack 8 for the flopped straight, as ace-king suited gets me in trouble and lets me down. So I lost back about half my profit from the first hand after playing a few more hands to no success, and was not happy about that. But when I saw this video of somewhere in the area of 30 dogs, mostly golden retrievers, frolicking around a pool, I did feel a little bit better. Tom was giving tons of action at this point, literally not folding a single hand. He'd even double up through a guy who thought he had been slow playing pocket kings, so he had plenty of chips in play. I'd lose about 150 in a spot where a open-ended straight draw didn't get me anywhere, and then I would play this hand against him. I have ace-jack of hearts, +1 and raised to 40. He would call on the button, and with 85 in, Tom and I are heads up to ace-king 4, 2 clubs, 1 heart, and I check it over to him. Unfortunately, this is the time where he doesn't bet. I was going to strongly consider check raising there for some thin value. Turn is the 3 of hearts. I bet 75 here, obviously with a lot going on for me. And after some deliberation, he calls. With 235 in, the river is interesting. It is the jack of clubs. And if I had it to do over again, I would have checked it to him and let him either represent a club flush or just, turn some random little pair into a bluff, as he's more than capable of doing. But instead, I hoped to just value bet it myself and get called by a number of hands that he could have. I make it 200, but he doesn't take too long before folding. This is a mid-session update. We are currently at a 100% VPIP with this individual in the 5 seat. So I'm not going to waste much more time and stop recording this update.
So fight and die for the things you know you love. Do what you think is right and see life do what you want.
Shortly after that, Tom would try to unsuccessfully bluff Bugsy out on the river, and then I'd play another hand against him when he was in the straddle. A few guys limp in, and I just over-limp with king-queen offsuit on the button to kind of see what he does. In this spot, he doesn't raise the straddle because, again, for those unfamiliar, Peppermill's format is a sleeper straddle game. So you straddle after you win the pot, and if someone raises in front of you, you act in turn. But if no one does, you still get last action. And I was kind of thinking he would use that action in this spot, but instead it's a checked situation, and with 50 in, the flop is king 3-3 rainbow, giving me top pair. Checks over to Tom in the low jack, and he fires 75. Folds to me, and I just call. So with 200 in, the turn is the 8 of hearts, and now he checks. Obviously, I have the green light to value bet here. I bet 100. He makes a brief speech about me not having a 3, but does call. And with 400 in, the river is the 7 of spades, and once again, he checks this over to me. I bet 200. Now he says that he's worried that I might have a 3. So I tell him I don't have a 3.
He does have that 3.
I do not have a 3.
You're a liar.
I don't think that me saying that actually talked him into calling this river, but apparently it didn't hurt, because after some hemming and hawing, he finally does call, creating an $800 pot, and I win against his king 6. So I'd win that one, but would lose it all back in the first hand of the day that I'd play against anyone else. It came against the aforementioned grinder from Northern Europe who'd made the trip in. Once again, I had ace king of spades, and once again, I would flop the nut flush draw and a Broadway draw, but all that would result in is me losing about 400 in the hand. So I was about 1,700 deep in this spot, and he had me covered, so the implied odds were definitely there, but unfortunately, the cards were not, as ace king burns me once more. The 100% VPIP number was in play for most of the day, though Sean V was paying close attention to this, and he said he saw him fold one hand on the day, and it was when he raised, apparently. So whatever 100% VPIP minus one hand is, that is apparently where this individual was on the day. I would lose about 150 more in a couple of small pots against him, which then preceded this hand. He was under the gun in the rock. MMA legend Ken Shamrock, who was also in this game, as you've seen in previous vlogs, limps in from the +1 position. I have queen 10 of hearts, middle position 2, and raised to 50. Both end up making the call. With 155 in, we get a flop of ace 10 8 with 2 hearts, giving me a pair and a flush draw, and it gets checked over to me. I need to get value out of hands here worse than a 10, so I down bet, making it just $65, and as expected, neither player goes anywhere. And with 350 in, I could start targeting a wider range of hands on the turn, as it would come the queen of spades, giving me 2 pair and a flush draw. Gets checked to me once more, this time I make it 150. Amazingly, and this is a sentence I didn't use too many times on the day, but Tom folds. And it's the world's most dangerous man that I'm heads up with after he makes the call going to the river. And with 650 in the pot, that card is the 9 of hearts, giving me the second nuts. Now, Ken is an interesting player. As you might imagine, he's capable of playing pretty wild. But over the course of the last few years, he has not really been doing that. In fact, it's gone the other way, where he's played a lot tighter than I would have ever expected him to play. Actually, he can be tough to get money out of in certain spots. But given what he ended up having here, it's not a surprise as to what would occur. I bet 300. And he thinks about this for a long time before ultimately calling, creating a $1,250 pot, and I win against his Queen Jack on what was obviously an ideal river card for me. Eventually, poker room manager Kathy Wood would have to come over and help with chip stacking and coloring for Tom. It was really a day-long process. He would actually rake in 3 more pots while Kathy was trying to help him get colored up. It was honestly amazing. So once again in this next hand, he has the rock in middle position 2. Folds to me in the cutoff, and I raise to 40 with ace-king suited once again. Now, he's literally never folding a single hand here, so he calls 30 more, and with 85 in, we're heads up to 6, 7, 8, 2 clubs, giving me the nut flush draw again. And sure enough, I face a donk lead. $75 gets bet into me. It's kind of his thing. Anyway, I was not sure the best way to play this, but I was also not unsure that I kind of wanted to build this pot up. So many good things can happen for me on a board like this against a player like this that I thought it was worth actually making a tiny raise here. So that's what I do, putting in 150. And if you're wondering, my plan absolutely, as you can imagine, was just to jam all in, should he 3-bet the flop. But that doesn't happen, as he just calls. And with 385 in, the turn is a terrible card for me. It's another 8, and he checks. So it's a weird spot. Obviously, he could have an 8, but he could also be in there with a ton of hands that are weaker than that. And in the moment, I talked myself into thinking that it was worth taking another shot here. In reality, even if he has just a pair of 7s, I probably should just check this back and actually try to make something against him. But I talked myself into betting. I'd make it 265. And my heart sank as he immediately announced that he was raising. And I was furious at myself for the way I'd played the hand. Based on what I'd seen with his check raises, those are the times where he usually has something. There are also reverse implied odds that are now involved with me hitting a club on the river, because it could be one of those spots where I hit my flush, but he fills up. And once again, if I hit an ace or a king and he bets big, I could certainly be paying him off because he's going to have a lot of big hands here too. So even though I hated to do it, I would just fold ace-king suited right now, a hand that was absolutely brutalizing me on the day. Fortunately, because again, he was one of the nicest guys ever and obviously gave tons of action, he would just show me that he had it. He turns over the 8 of spades, proving that he had trips. Tom would battle Ken again, and this time, Shamrock's Queen Jack would take down a $4,000 pot against top 2 pair. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for this true legend of Reno Poker. Whether or not we'll see him again, we are unsure. But Tom and Ken both limp in here, and I have the Jack-9 of hearts on the button. And given the fact that I have position in this pot and no one else has shown much strength, I thought I could get it heads up and I make it 50. But both of those two end up calling. With 150 in, the board comes out King 10 deuce, 1 heart, and it's actually Ken that leads out for 60 from the hijack here. I make this call with my gut shot straight draw and backdoor flush draw, assuming that Tom is coming in as well. And sure enough, he does. And with 330 in, the turn is an offsuit jack. And then it gets really interesting. It didn't surprise me at all that Tom would then proceed to jam all in here for his entire stack of $540 that he had left. I actually assumed that Ken was going to call here the vast majority of the time, but he doesn't. He did think about it, but finally folded. So it was one of those spots where if Ken calls, I'm folding. But now that Ken folds, I'm calling. So we have a $1,400 pot. Tom ends up having 7-4 offsuit. So I get the remainder of his stack, which would wrap up an absolutely wild 4-hour period at the Peppermill Poker Room. Tom then gets replaced by Michigan Bill. Anyway, it was an up and down day against an absolute legend, which I would wrap up on a winning note. All right, wrapping up the session. It is too windy to record this outro outside, so I am doing it here. A $940 win. It's interesting. Out of all the days that I've ever played poker, where I could potentially be disappointed with a $940 win, this would probably be top of that list. Getting absolutely obliterated by ace-king suited, flopping the nut flush draw in 3 hands, and pretty upset with myself on how I played that one in particular. Glad that I was able to suss out the fact that he did indeed have trips, and it was not the greatest spot to go against him on the river there, because the reverse implied odds should I hit a board pairing club are extremely great, as I thought they might be. But against a guy who's playing every single hand, it's just one of those times where it's like my inclination was like, I got to get a lot of money into this pot with this equity against this player. Outside of that slip up, I don't think I played any hand egregiously terrible with the ace-king suited, but boy, did it cost me, bricking absolutely everything with it on every opportunity that I got. But able to make up for it, obviously, in some other hands, and get out of here with a win, making most of the money back in which I lost yesterday. All right, recording this section of the vlog approximately 1 week after the release of the last vlog. And by the way, a couple nights back, I had a chance to attend a concert. You'll see which one coming up in a couple of minutes, as I am going to immortalize a portion of it at the end of the vlog, as I've done following several previous shows that I've attended. And I do that primarily for selfish reasons, wanting to be able to refer back to it years later. But I must say, I am still on tilt. I got to experience on June 13th, the greatest day in Nevada sports history and one of the great sports days of my life, probably the greatest, when my Vegas Golden Knights won the Stanley Cup. And it happened on a Tuesday night, which was the best case scenario for me because my son Austin got to be here with me and experience that with me. So it's like I got to experience the highest of highs. And then 1 week ago, the lowest of lows. I've watched basically every San Francisco 49ers game since 1992. The first one I remember watching was that Monday night game in the rain against the Detroit Lions, where Joe Montana came off the bench as trade bait to be showcased when they had everything sewn up at the end of that year in the final week after he'd been out for 2 straight seasons. That's the first game I remember watching. And I basically watched every single game since then. And obviously they won the Super Bowl when I was in 4th grade, but have not managed to do it since, and it's starting to become pretty aggravating because there's nothing worse than just getting close and constantly not getting there. I don't think this game is one that I'm ever going to get over. I mean, the Chiefs don't score a touchdown in regulation until they have, I think, a 16-yard field in front of them, only because the ball happened to somehow deflect off of Darrell Luter's foot on a fluky punt play, and I do believe that's what decided the Super Bowl. If that doesn't happen, I do believe the 49ers win the Super Bowl. So pretty aggravating. I do not believe that Kyle Shanahan's play calling cost them the game. But obviously there's a few that I'm sure he would like to have back and that I would have liked to have seen gone differently, primarily those 2 third downs at the end of both regulation and overtime, amazingly both of which kind of were the very same situation where it's unclear if he should throw the ball or not. And I'm not a huge believer in our quarterback, Brock Purdy, so the fact that he was the guy tasked with the job and was unable to come up with a play when the Super Bowl was on the line does not surprise me. Would have much rather seen CMC get the ball in that spot, but no coach ever runs the ball in that spot, and we saw that play out in both those 2 circumstances, and settling for field goals obviously was not enough. I think I've said this before, and I'm doing it again. Shout out to those of you, and this is like the easiest time for me ever to say this, obviously, but shout out to those of you who just aren't sports fans. You're probably not watching this anyway now, but to those of you who just don't care and never have, you guys get to win days like this, because there's nothing worse than losing in the Super Bowl in a game that you should have won, which I believe the 49ers have now done 3 times, because I acknowledge that it's stupid. You know, why do people like me care so much? It's like, we really shouldn't. No, we really shouldn't. And those of you that don't, on days like this, I always say you guys are the ones that have it figured out. Anyway, sometimes life provides you with times where you have to find a way to bounce back. This vlog and the result of it notwithstanding, has not been a great year for me poker-wise. And obviously, I got to bounce back from that, as do the 49ers coming up next year. I have one more vlog to shoot here in Reno, and then I'm going to be shooting a vlog in the US prior to me leaving the country for a week. And you're going to have to wait and find out where I'm going in that vlog. Meanwhile, let's ship up to Boston and wrap up this one.